Our group members for this project are Sophie Yu, Ginny Choi, and William Cha. We are all in the B-Day Honors English class. Our author we will be introducing today is Derek Walcott. We will be covering the author's background, the interpretation of his Nobel Prize speech, and analysis of his work. Please enjoy!
Moving on to the author's background, I will start by talking about Derek Walcott's personal, family, and career background, and also some of his famous works and a few interesting facts about him. According to Nobelprize.com, Derek Walcott was born in 1930 in the town of Castries in St. Lucia. The experiences of growing up on this isolated volcanic island has had a strong influence on his life, and these experiences are evidently reflected in many of his works. Walcott was a bright student who attended to the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, where he learned different languages such as French, Latin, and Spanish. He was also an assiduous traveler to other countries, but has always felt himself deeply rooted in the Caribbean society. Now I will talk about Walcott's family background. According to History.com, Walcott's father was a Bohemian watercolorist and his mother was the head of the local Methodist school. But when Walcott was only a few years old, his father died, and so his mother had to raise the family on her own. Also, according to thefamouspeople.com, Walcott's grandmothers were said to have been the descendants of slaves in the West Indies, and this is interesting because the legacy of slavery is a common theme in many of his work. Next, I will be talking about Walcott's career background. For many years, Walcott has divided his time between Trinidad and Boston University. According to poetryfoundation.org, Walcott worked as a writer in Trinidad and taught literature and creative writing in Boston University. In 1959, he founded the Trinidad Theatre Workshop, which produced many of his early plays. Now moving on to his works. Derek Walcott was a prolific poet who wrote in a lush style and explored multicultural tensions and questions of identity. According to Nobelprize.com, some of his most famous poems and plays were In a Green Light, Amaris, and Dream on Monkey Mountain. In 1992, Walcott was the first Caribbean writer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Finally, I will talk about two interesting facts about Derek Walcott. The first interesting fact, according to thefamouspeople.com, is that he married 3 times with 3 different women, but ended up divorcing with all 3 of them. The second interesting fact about him, according to allpoetry.com, is that he had a twin brother named Roderick Walcott, who is also a playwright.
Now moving on to Derek Walcott's Nobel Prize speech. There are 3 main ideas being presented. Latin American culture should be honored, history should not be forgotten, and nature is great. In his Nobel Prize speech, Derek Walcott describes that the Latin American culture is developing and it should be more honored. Also, he talks about how in present days, history is easily forgotten and that nature always presents us with its beauty and greatness. The first passage represents the idea that Latin American culture should be honored. I stand here in their name, if not their image, but also in the name of the dialect they exchange, like leaves of the trees, whose names are suppler, greener, more morning stirred than English. In this passage, Derek Walcott says that he is representing all of his Latin American people, their image, and also their culture. Then he goes on explaining how the Latin American dialect is more fresh and distinctive. Then, in the second passage, the next theme that history should not be forgotten is presented. All of entails every island is an effort of memory, every mind, every racial biography, culminating in amnesia and fog. Even before this passage, Derek Walcott explains how the many islands of Latin America is just being imaged into tourist sites, and people who visit only remember the islands as a vacation site with nice weather. This idea ties in with his expression that every complex and historical dimension of entails is culminating in amnesia and fog, as the amnesia and fog representing the modern image of entails. Finally, in the last passage, his idea of nature's superiority is shown. Framed stanzas that might contain the light of hills on an island blessed by obscurity, cherishing our insignificance. This passage straightforwardly tells us how we humans are insignificant before nature, and in this case, the hills and the islands. All of these passages and Derek Walcott's Nobel Prize speech ties in with Latin America. He discusses many of the Latin American problems of their culture not being respected, and islands turning into a mere vacation site, and more. Also, until the often discussed location is the islands of Latin America.
I'll be talking about the poem called Love After Love by Derek Walcott, starting off with theme. In Love After Love, Derek Walcott shows that one should love one's true self by his expression used through many different literary devices, such as imagery, tone, and repetition. Now, I'll be talking about one of the literary devices used in Love After Love, imagery. He used imagery of one treating oneself as a guest. Our evidence would be, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome. I could explain that this imagery of me as a host greeting myself and smiling upon my arrival shows that I should love myself and treat myself as a guest to my home. Other evidence would be, peel your own image from the mirror. This strong imagery of me peeling an image or a side of my identity is just for show. Sit, feast on your life. This imagery shows that one should enjoy him or her life as their original self. I'll be talking about second literary device, tone. Calling oneself as you makes the tone of the poem caring, as if one is treating oneself as a guest. First evidence would be, give wine, give bread, give back your heart. This tone would be commanding to love oneself and very subsided. At your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome. Tone is welcoming and polite, also caring. But those are all aiming toward ourselves. Sit, feast on your life. This text is very lenient and positive tone. Lastly, repetition. There are repetition on word own and you to emphasize himself. First evidence is, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome. I could say that he talks about himself many times and how he greet himself, and that shows how he treat himself, how he think that he is important to himself. Second evidence is, you will love again the stranger who was yourself. To itself, to the stranger who has loved you. Explanation would be, stranger is himself and he is treating himself well. He loves himself and emphasizes him to be important. Last evidence is, are you alive whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart? Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. He explains how he could have ignored himself, but he shows how he should love himself. Inside by heart, he loves himself and he knows that by heart. Repetition is on the word you. Most of the word repetition, tone, and literary devices, the evidences repeats itself throughout the literary devices. This poem is mainly focused on yourself/myself, as you can tell. Title Love After Love also shows that you should love yourself no matter what, and it never gets enough. Through imagery, Derek shows us what we should do or what we should act like in order to love ourselves. Not only he focuses on love, but taking care and treating, including that we should just be ourselves. Through tone, he shows us how we should care, treat ourselves. Tone sets the mood to make us emotional and get more into the text. Repetition is a good way to emphasize what you're trying to say. Derek is keep telling us that we are the one that is important, and mainly that we should love ourselves. To conclude all, through these literary devices, he shows that we should love ourselves and treat ourselves well.
The most important thing we learned about analyzing text was that we need to think beyond what is told and try to imply the real meaning in the text. I hope you liked our presentation about Derek Walcott's background, his Nobel Prize speech, and the analysis of his work. Thank you everyone for listening, and this has been Ginny Choi,
Sophie Yu,
And William Cha.